Hot Take. Today, I'm joined by producer Alex. Is that fair? Can I just call you producer Alex? Is that good?
Yeah.
Or should
I
we
love
come up with something different? Producer Alex.
producer Alex is
Okay,
perfect.
producer Alex. Producer Alex. Alex has a really good topic for us to discuss. We teased this a little bit on Tuesday that we would be bringing a hot take per se, going through something that I see a lot in the world that I'm involved in the leadership space, the coaching space, the self improvement space. So we're going to dive into that. We had an amazing conversation yesterday, the episode that we recorded that will be released later, that I know is going to give a little bit of context to today's conversation. So I'm excited to take off and go. Alex, why don't you share with the audience kind of the impetus for today, the direction we're going to go?
Absolutely. Yeah, excited to talk about this subject matter in the personal development, self-help, coaching space. There's a lot of coaches out there, new coaches, all different types in different areas and sectors and verticals. And what we are going to focus on are the bigger, bolder, meaner, madder, aggressive stances. Some of the biggest, names in the space. Why they have this stance? Because it's just kind of a philosophical question that I just asked myself, where I've worked with and you've worked with some incredibly wealthy, prosperous, happy individuals that don't seem to have that bone in their body in that way and position on life, and they may have had it
Would
earlier.
angst be a word to kind of drop?
Yeah,
Angst?
angst. Yeah,
Angst.
that's a great word.
Okay.
And I just ask, like, why are they so popular? Why are they so effective? And is it sustainable?
Yeah. So you helped create a thumbnail for today. There's three figures: Andy Frisella, Grant Cardone, and Ed Milet. I think we could have added, but then I think the bald quotient would have gone too high to add in Andy Elliott. I understand most pictures there's a bald quotient. You don't want to like blind people. Let's focus on those four guys, all males in the space of podcast, events. I would say even coaching and speaking. There's one that's different than the other. And I'm going to start there with Ed Milet. So I have never personally interacted with Ed. You have. You've
Yeah.
actually have a relationship with Ed.
Yeah.
My first introduction to Ed Milet, had no idea who the guy was. And he had on his podcast, a wildly successful podcast that is now syndicated on SiriusXM. He had John Maxwell as a guest. And I'd known John for several years. And so I was very intrigued. I guess I knew who Ed was because I had people that were in his sphere in LA. And this was my very first take on Ed. I wish I would have brought up the text message that I sent to my friend. I wonder if I can search for
Yeah.
it. Give
Check
me
it.
just a second
Yeah. Yeah.
because
As you,
it was yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say, as you search for that, I love Ed. I know him well, and I think there's definitely been a shift in some of his tone and his stance through time as he's gotten older. I think he can sound and come across aggressive. Some might say like angry, but I think it's passion. I think he has a ton of passion, and you know, and definitely his physical demeanor. Works out obviously, very strong individual. Um, but does that tone consistently work over time? And that's the one thing that I'm curious about. It's not, this isn't here to poo poo on anybody. It's more of philosophical thinking and understanding of there's different approaches to personal development and coaching, and it's more of a curiosity to see shifts. Gary Vee is another good example, and someone that I know personally of someone who shifted his tone as time has gone on. And I'm just curious, other people's, for those listening, if you've noticed that, if you felt that, in your own personal life, where you may have been this more loud, boisterous, maybe egotistical individual, and then through time, those types of emotions haven't gotten you very far, or aren't sustainable in your life and your relationships, and what that experience has been like.
So here's the text message. This is someone actually you know. It's in a circle. I said, "Hey man, hope your mastermind is going great. Looks to be at least. Would love to catch up again. P.S. I know you guys have done stuff with Ed Milet. I just listened to John Maxwell's podcast with him. I was wildly surprised by Ed." To me, that's the start of this. And one of the things that I have, and I have to accept this, this isn't always the case. We've actually talked about this recently. I've had people talk about this. They're like, "Oh, Tyler, you aren't quite what I expected." I'm like, "All right, I got to work on that." And, my response was I felt catfished. What I heard on his podcast was wildly different than the image that he portrayed himself. You talked about this kind of this angry look, this kind of overpowering look. One of the things that I've really had to grow through in my personal development is understanding how my personal demeanor speaks to people. And one of the things that I have, we've talked a little bit about, I can share in this space right now, that I've had to overcome is my intensity. Now, I think if we look through the four figures that we've named, the three that are on the thumbnail, all of them have a level of intensity, an extreme amount of intensity. I would almost, if we sat here and say, "Hey, what is one of your attributes?" I bet they would say intensity. Man, it's what got me where I am.
And we had that conversation yesterday with an extremely successful leader, extremely wealthy leader, and he had that same approach to life.
Well, what's interesting, let me, hey, Alex, just a little closer to the mic, a little hard to hear you.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
There you go. So this individual yesterday, I'll go ahead and name it, Ron Carson. It's obviously going to be a future episode that we release. What was very interesting learning about Ron and knowing about Ron grew up on a farm like I did. And one of the stories about Ron is employees at his family's farm had a really hard time because, they'd want lunch break. And his dad's like, "No, you pack your lunch and you keep going." And like the number of meals that I had sitting on a tractor, like I can't even, start to count them. That was just normal. That wasn't abnormal. That was normal. To eat as you go, to eat as you're working, just keep on going. Because, it was a luxury to be able to take a break and go sit down and have a meal. That was like an oddity. And so this idea, and he shared this in internal intensity, this workaholism that he was driven by, led by, is what helped him create tremendous wealth. But then as he shared with us, it came at a cost. It came at a cost of his personal well-being. It came at a cost of his relationship. So let me center this back to, maybe someone like Ed and Andy. And again, I'm not calling them out because I think one of the things that I've had to overcome and learn is, man, they have value. They're trying to serve people. They absolutely are in a way where they're trying to give a gift that they have to others. And I'm not discounting that. What I am sharing is what I had to learn is that my intensity was a barrier to my insecurity, and it was a bulldozer. And it absolutely just wrecked people. And I can remember at times, even before this, that I would struggle because, I had high expectations and people would struggle with my expectations because my expectations of me were very high. Right. And undoubtedly, they felt those expectations. And a lot of times that was not even expressed by me, but that's how they felt. Interestingly enough, the text message that I sent him, he was one person that shared with me is that, dude, like, you don't realize the impact that you have in a room. And I was like, I didn't understand. And now what I understand is that intensity weighed heavy in a lot of cases. That intensity went before me and it drew a conclusion. So when I come back to my interaction, as I've shared with Ed, is his intensity, his furrow brow, his demeanor suggests it's all about me. And when you hear him, it's wildly different. And I think, as we dig a little bit deeper into the self-improvement, and again, I'm talking about my personal journey. I'm talking about my journey of, trying to mask my insecurity, armor my insecurity as a result of, my childhood experiences, the death of my brother, overcoming those experiences. I had to uncover that in order to more effectively touch, impact, reach people. And as I'm looking at other individuals and have this almost heartfelt compassion,
Right.
that is like, guys, maybe I'm not one to speak in your life. I don't have the commas. But you know what? When I talk to a lot of people that have the commas and we have those conversations, they're like, man, yeah, you understand. So I think that isn't in play. And it's just like, it doesn't have to be that way, man. Just soften yourself up a little bit. Be vulnerable. Be willing to, accept some of that insecurity and own it rather than try to hide from it with this hard external facade.
Yeah, I think, I've been thinking, because we've had this conversation, behind the scenes for quite a while, and I'm so happy and excited we get to talk about it now, is this disposition, right? This body language. You mentioned a couple body language experts, and my normal disposition is smiling, happy, go lucky, but I have a switch, right? I
Okay.
a very high level
Yeah.
of Division I football.
It's
and
good
I
to know
can
the
get-
switch.
Yeah, like it, and I'm very aware of it because I can get extremely intense, and that is that alter ego almost, right? That I have to switch on because in that particular circumstance, the battlefield of football, which is very intense, and at that level of Division I, you have to have that animalistic approach of like, I am going to seek and destroy. I play defense, but then normally, I'm pretty happy and go lucky. And for some of these coaches, when you observe them, their body language, their behavior, I feel, and this is from my own experiences, that there's always that level of intensity, because that's what, like you said, it got them the wealth, it got them the commas, it got them this community of people and this power. And Tyler, when you mentioned something earlier of like at what cost? Like what can you break? Like what are the costs at staying at that vibration and that energy level? And I think we lost Tyler because I see.
I'll be up.
Are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm here. I hear you. Intensity is like a bulldozer. Man, it can be wildly effective at clearing land. It can be effective at its purpose. Unfortunately, when you decide to drive a bulldozer down the road, well, then you just push cars out of your way. It's not effective. It's not healthy. It's not a productive way to move. So you're right. There are times where it is effective. You need it. But there are other times where it's wildly destructive. And I think as I understood, the carnage left around me was the relationships. The people that, the African proverb often quoted is one goes fast, many go far. And, for me, and it would be interesting, I've had this conversation with a CEO. A good relationship, mentor relationship, close relationship. And, for people that hear this, that are maybe struggling with this intensity or this go, this workaholism, like I get up and I go because that's what has allowed me to have success. I had to learn how to be lazy. And when I share that with people, they're like, oh, I get that. And other people are like, lazy? Like, what do you mean? It's like, no, I had to learn to go at the pace of others. Now, it doesn't mean that I didn't walk with them, encourage them to go a little bit faster, to, up the speed. It's kind of like if you're going with a running coach and say they run a 6-minute mile and you're struggling to do a 9:30, okay? And they can run at a pace much faster than you. If they take off at their 6-minute pace and you're struggling at 9:30, you're going to be like, whatever, dude, bye. But if they say, hey, I'll walk with you. And you know what? We're just going to take it up a little bit faster and a little bit faster. And maybe that's that training session. Maybe it's the next training session. Within a couple sessions, whatever, if you stay with it, you can be running potentially a 6-minute mile right with them. But they had the care, the candor, the emotional attendance, empathy to go with you at the pace that you could go. Instead of walking in the room and say, all right, Unless you can run a 6-minute mile, you're dead to me. You are worthless. I can't have you. And I think that's that last piece. That's the feeling that I think often gets portrayed. This is the only way to run. If you can't run a 6-minute mile today, man, you just might as well go, just what, I mean, I could use the example. Well, I mean, Grant Cardone has been quoted, I would be embarrassed if I only made $400,000 a year. It's like, all right, for you, great. What does that mean? Because for other people in certain parts of the world, yeah, 400 grand living in a high rise in Miami, probably not getting very far. I get it. 400 grand in Omaha, Nebraska, it's a little different situation. If you look at that, or, Andy Elliott has said, unless you're 5% body fat, you're an absolute waste of, a life. And it's just like, come on, dude. Like, now there's elements there encourage you to, can you do more with your money? Are you worth more? Because we're all worth more, but are we pursuing that in understanding the cost and weighing that balance? That's great. Your health, I'm convinced, absolutely. I've shared this at times before. I've never read a story of a man laying on a gurney about ready to go in for quadruple bypass that is having the most impactful, fulfilling day of his life. Doesn't happen. So with that consideration, you got to take care of yourself. You only got one body, and you can only impact people at the level of your health.
Right.
And so I don't disagree with some of their messaging. Like just the other day, I shared a message from Andy Frisella about leadership, and I was taken aback. I'm like, dude's spot on. But then you look at him in kind of the angst and the anger and the MFCEO, and I'm just going to, and it's like, dude, you're using a lot of the impact because the heart's not there. The heart isn't showing, and I think that's the bigger thing to me is when we continually guard our heart, the humanity is lost.
Well, I think back to why do this in the first place? What are people seeking? Is it material objects? Is it the planes and the cars and the houses? Ultimately, we spoke to Ron yesterday. It is about peace and living at a certain level of tranquility and vibration. And those material objects, they don't necessarily bring you that. Am I wrong here?
Well, I think that's what's so interesting. And Ron and I, again, we keep referencing the podcast that will release later this year. I think one of the things, and I take it for granted, and again, I don't even fully understand it. Growing up on a farm gave me a wildly different perspective than so many others. The reliance of animals on you. The fact that if you don't do it, it doesn't get done. The understanding of the growth and the life cycle and the value of doing something with your hands. That's something that to me is just, I don't know a different, because all the days of my life, I know that. That's what I learned. And I think Ron kind of shared many of those. That's where he loves to be, and outside, and, being outside, because that's what's almost innately normal. And I think there's a humanity to that. That is how we were, have lived for thousands and thousands of years. And it's only now where we see value in front of a screen. It's only now that we see value from so many of the comments. It's only now that we see value in a material objects. And I think that's where, when we start to seek what's the meaning of life, and it ends up being possessions, or it ends up becoming fame, or it ends up, I have this drive, I will never be broke again, so I will do whatever to put as much money in my bank account and have this collection of cars and be able to fly here, there, and whatever. And I'm not discounting, okay, that you can get enjoyment out of that, or there's a financial quality to it that is productive, but why? And is that serving people? And I think, we fall into this period of today. It's like, all right, is your value in what you've attained, or is your value in how you serve and impact others? And I've had a tremendous mentor that's been wildly successful, has sold the number one author to sell books on Amazon. And very rarely will you ever see him flying around in objects. Very rarely. I mean, I've seen what he drives once, and that was because I was with him. You don't see him parade around that, but what you see him doing is spending time with people. You see him interacting with others. You see him serving. You see him trying to uplift others. That's what his value is, and not a monetary. And so that comes back in my heart and reminds me, Tyler, that's what's more important.
Right. And I think where the disconnect and what happens for me is, like you said, the body language, the what their purpose is in trying to help and enhance people's lives, and then the branding, right? It's like I see these highly photoshopped, and then also the cars and the things are the tip of the spear for the branding and marketing strategy, which I think only gets you so far, because then I go, well, why are they doing that? And it's like, I know those things attract certain types of people, right?
Yeah.
That desire those things. And we spoke about this yesterday. When I get the 10,000, when I get the 100,000, when I get the million, when I get the 5, I got 20 million in my bank account, but I'm empty. I have a house full of stuff, but I'm empty inside. And I've been so lucky to work with multi-billionaires, and every time they are not like those that are branding the cars. They're so different. And I asked myself why. And then we spoke to a guy like Ron yesterday who's at that level, and he brought that to light. And I think that's what I just want to shine a spotlight on, that he was, there has to be this balance and understanding, and like you said, self-awareness to all that.
One of the things that I believe is there's very much a male quality. A male quality of being a hunter-gatherer. There's a male quality of being a warrior. Doesn't mean it's solely for men, but it's a male quality that is noted in many different species. And I think when you have a individual who holds on to that as their protective identity, really it comes down to that, it's identity. And being able to attract an age demographic, a type of person, a person, for example, that has played maybe sports at a level, and they needed that aggressiveness. It was a way for them to express that aggressiveness, and then through that expression of aggressiveness, they saw value, they saw acceptance, they saw worth. And so to continue that on, that seems like the likely pathway. That's what we need to do. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I fell into that trap. I fell into that place, absolutely. But it was out of I'm trying to protect myself, or I'm trying to assert value. It wasn't that, hey, man, this is the person I am. This is how I know I can best interact and build relationships and connect with people. It was, if people really find out the truth, or I'm trying to hide something because society has said the truth needs to be hidden because it's not valued. Well, then I fall into this pattern of what can I do to gain acceptance? And I think that's where, when you come back from is it a marketing? Is it a social media? Is it that drive? Because I caution, one thing that, our conversation yesterday brought up is, let's think of figures in the past, self-improvement. Let's talk about, individuals of past generations who were very instrumental in the development of others. Jim Rohn. He was often quoted as being one of the greatest, I would say, people to help in self-development. Zig Ziglar. Yep. You have Napoleon Hill, which we talked about.
Dyer, Louise Hay.
Wayne. Yeah, and then you meet these individuals, or you start to understand these individuals, and realize they're not like the modern day in-your-face guys. Now, did those people exist then? Probably. But were they revered as the leaders in this space? And I think that's the interesting part. That's the place that it's kind of like, okay, Like, what are we either misaligning or what are we accepting and allowing? And there's not enough people like myself. And I know my friend Justin Rothling show for he and I've talked about it. He's spoken out about this. He spoke out one day. It was so funny. I loved how he took this, and he handled it much better than I. But he commented about David Goggins. David Goggins was at a Lewis Howes event, and he had just had surgery, and Lewis challenged him to do push-ups. And so he got down on the floor, and he's doing his push-ups. And there was this celebration. He made this comment, yeah, that didn't help my recovery. And Justin's like, then why did you do it? Like, what are you trying to show off? Like, is that all you're worth? Because if that's all you're worth, and we had a previous guest, this will be another podcast that shows up later this year, who's done amazing human feats. Amazing. Like, has done feats that no other human has ever done.
Yeah.
And myself and a previous podcast host asked him, like, what drives you to do it? And he goes, I don't know. Well, don't you want to find out? No. Because if I find out and that changes me, then it won't drive me to do this. I don't want to. If what I do makes me wrong, then I'm happy to be wrong. And it's like, wow, okay. But is that someone that I need to follow and mimic and say, oh, that's the pathway to a better life?
It brings up so much. I love that you brought up the past generations, right? Going back to, the 70s and the 80s into the 90s and beyond. Is think about who's sustained, right? Who's lived on that we remember, and it's all
those
voices.
Names.
Yeah, those names and those voices that were calming and seemed to be at this balanced, peaceful level.
I mean, Mandela, Gandhi.
Think about that, right? It's like it never was the aggressive, hyper.
You want to hear something really funny? It just hit me. It's pretty cool. Jane Goodall, the researcher that has done tremendous amounts of research within the chimpanzee and ape community.
Yes.
I listened to this podcast. I forget who the guest was or who the host was, but they interviewed her. She just had a recent study come out. This was within the last 2 or 3 years, and she studied a group of chimpanzees. And you know what she found out? The most aggressive chimpanzees led for the least amount of time. They had an average tenure of I think 18 months. Whereas the more embracive, the more empathetic, the more calm, level-headed individuals actually led that group for more than a 2x time. It was, again, I'm not going to say evolution, we came from apes. I don't believe that. That's fine. I mean, you can believe what you want to believe. That's cool. But I do believe there are innate qualities that do match up through all species.
Yeah, through nature.
Through nature in general. We can talk about cows. We can talk about those cows walking around behind, the things that I've learned from them, the qualities that I hold and realize the most aggressive ones, no one wants to be around. I've worked around some just absolutely nightmare cows that are so skittish, so anxious, so on a live wire. It's not fun to be around. And the ones that have a more demeaning, a demure personality or a personality. Some of my favorite cows to ever work with have quirky, funny personalities. There was this cow one time, Jewel. And she was a show cow. She was pretty. She was one of the prettiest cows of her breed at the time. And she was just a character. We would walk her back and forth the barn, and there would be, kind of had to walk across a driveway. And so we just put up a rope because the cows were pretty timid, tame. It was no big deal. She would sneak under the rope just to go eat the grass on the other side of the rope. You'd go to get her back. She knew she was in trouble. She'd scurry back under the rope and come to the barn. And it was just every day. And she had just this quirky personality that you'd want to get irritated by, but you knew it was just her. She wasn't doing anything to I'm going to break free and run away. It was just I can get away with this and watch me do this. And, even when exhibiting these cows, because you're leading them around, and the ones that are just the personality and the quirks and the things they do, it makes it fun to be around. It makes it fun to take care of. It's no different than a dog, really. It's none. And so let's bring all this back and say those qualities Those qualities endure time in relationships. And I think really the thing that drives me is impact.
Yeah.
I can do something short term. We can justify intensity. We can justify intensity and say, man, that's the way to get a result. Yeah.
Yeah. I got
Short
results
term.
on the field that way, and I thought that was
Yeah.
in specific settings. It was very useful. But I
Yeah.
think over time, like we're talking about here, the study of what's lasting, whose legacies have withstood that we still listen to and acquire, they're never those really hyper aggressive. There's always this peacefulness and calmness to them and balance, and that's where I think this merry-go-round, right? This merry-go-round of going from one coach or one community
Oh.
to the next. I think you almost, if you're in this space and you're seeking wealth or development or healing, you almost have to go through it, like to see that community you vibe with, to experience what I think obviously you bring to the table, and that's what it's attracted me to partner and work with you and every single day, which I love, is this. You've done the work. You've spent the time and energy in multiple areas to find what's worked for you, and it has been the breaking down of insecurity and vulnerability, which I think is the starting point of a lot of this.
Well, when you can embrace it and when you can accept it, I think the great opportunity there then is it's no longer a weapon to be used against you.
Yeah.
See, a known is understood. A known you can, I guess, navigate around. It's the unknowns that hurt you. It's the unknowns that catch you. It's when it's a known. It's like, I can deal with that. I know what it is. I know that's a limitation. How do I work against it? You go to any strategist. It's the unknown that scares them. The known they can handle, no big deal. And I think the more that we do that as individuals, the more that we do that as leaders, the more that we do that as just plain humans, we accept our limitations because they're okay. That's a human universality, is that we have limitations. But those limitations don't dictate what we're possible to do. Those limitations just put guardrails or frameworks upon it. It's our opportunity to maximize our strengths and those gifts to use them at the betterment of others. And I think that's what becomes fun, is discovering that. And as a leader, the curiosity to help others discover and unlock that potential, man, that comes at a great, I would say, premium. Because when you unlock it, then all of a sudden you see something that you never thought possible on both sides. And that's really exciting. I do want to circle back. And one of the things, this is tying into this idea of self-improvement and the merry-go-round. I think it's often that people go on this self-improvement pathway, believing once they have everything, all the tools in the toolbox, then they'll be set. But the reality, as I've learned, is you have to be willing to just use one at a time and continually work and dig a little bit deeper. And the one tool will lead to the next place. And instead of going to an event or expecting a coach or a mastermind or a getaway weekend and all of your problems are going to be solved. No, I mean, it's to serve a lot of different people in a lot of different places. But there may be one little nugget, one little key that unlocks what is locked in you, and then go to the next step and then realize that's going to come against another locked gate. And what can I do to unlock it, and not think that, all right, man, if I go to this weekend with Alex and we're going to hang out, that all my problems will be solved. It doesn't work like that. That's not, in my experience, how to go about life. If anything, you're overwhelmed because there's so much that you don't know what should I go to? Or the people that become self-improvement professionals, meaning I go to this conference and that conference and that conference and that conference and that conference, and I keep going to all these events and I see all the same people. But you're like, what have you done with any of it? Have you taken the time to change either your daily habit, or have you taken the time to really dig in and invest and say, all right, I need to go deeper rather than wider? Because when I go deeper, I'll get closer to the root. And as Dr. Caroline Leaf shared in our podcast years ago, the root, man, that's where you need to get. And you keep trying to trim all the branches, that tree's still going to grow. Those leaves are still going to pop up every spring. It's not until you get to the root and understand, oh, this is why I react the way I do, or these are the reasons why I have the thoughts I do. Now I can start to move forward.
Tyler, can you describe the root? Can you go deeper on that? I think this is so key and important for those listening, as you're seeking, right? Those seeking to improve their lives.
Yeah. Well,
what is the root? What are the roots?
Well, for me, I'll share two examples of one for me discovering the root. It was an example where I didn't realize my intensity was an issue. I didn't understand my intensity. I knew it was there and I just kind of relied on it. That's my personality. That's who I am. And it kind of feels good because it's natural to me. And I had this moment, it was a spiritual moment where I was facing some challenges in business. I was leading people where we had difficulties, some employed, just stuff, normal business stuff, relationship stuff any leader has to work through. And my solution was, I'm just going to put my head down and push through it. And you're either with me or get the hell out of my way. The bulldozer, right? And I'm at the gym, I sit down on the bench and I hear this, for me, it's God, for, others, it's a spiritual event, and said, this is how you deal with things. And it was like, okay, now I got to dig a little bit deeper. What do you mean? And that's when it was revealed to me that my intensity was the driver of dealing with those things. Like, oh. And so then I dug a little bit deeper to find out and understand, where did that intensity come from? It's like, oh, that's a part of me. That's a part of me. That's a part of me. And I actually had one of my youth coaches, and I was, as I was questioning, I was pondering, and I reached out to her. And this is someone that coached me from like 8 to probably 14, somewhere in there, and knew me before and after my brother died, and said, hey, how did that event change me? And she goes, well, you're always happy and go lucky. And then afterwards, you became very intense. I'm like, okay, great. And I also knew that a lot of my relationships in high school was I had that very intense, and friends telling me is like, yeah, you were just very intense. And so what I remembered then was a response on that day that my brother died, and talking to the sheriff and looking him and just being so like armored and strong and saying, I'm not going to let you sway me. I'm not going to let you deter me and make me think more about a situation I don't want to think about. I'm going to go put my head down and work. And it was me understanding that, realizing, oh, yeah, my problem was my intensity. There was another situation where this kind of came about, and this idea of this was a problem was just a handful of years ago. And I was at an event, and I made a fool of myself and realized, why did I do that? And it was, again, me protecting the value I had, because the person that I was with was quite honestly way outshining anything that I had ever accomplished. And I tried to kind of downplay their achievement and upload myself and whatever I had personally achieved from this value. And it was me understanding, oh, that was something that I was trying to prop myself up because I was afraid of just admitting who I really was. Sorry, there's a third one. I'm going to share a third one. And this is just recent. So I had as a guest, again, we're talking about different guests and they've impacted me, but Mike Foster is going to be released later this year. He wrote a book called The Primal Questions, and going through that with my wife, one of the primal question that I ask is, am I wanted? It's like, okay, well, that feeds into my insecurity, my valued, like, am I valued? And we were talking to a guest recently, Thais Gibson, and talking about attachment theory. And she was sharing how in her work she understood and discovered that a lot of the subconscious ways that we act are driven by instances that happen in our very, very, very young childhood. And so I relayed a story to her that I only learned about probably 2 years ago, is that when I was 2, I went to live with my aunt and uncle for a couple months, because my parents were in a change of business. They had kind of lost their farm. They had lost the house. And so my sister and I went to live with my aunt and uncle. And I'm like, all right, how much does that potentially affect me? And she's like, yeah, absolutely. And so all of these things being revealed because I was curious enough to keep digging, asking, why is it that way? Am I sitting there saying, oh, that's my reason I'm a victim? No, I can take control of it. And so that goes back to those are the roots that caused me to put on these different armors and show up as I do today. And being able to own them and speak about them, quite honestly, being able to speak about my brother gives his life tremendous value because how it shaped and impacted me and the ability to shape and impact others by that. When we discuss the roots and the self-improvement, I think the most important factor is to be curious and say, why? Not why because I'm a victim or why that, oh, poor me. Why? So that way you can create a new path, a new mindset, a new belief that does not hinder or protect what we thought we had to protect. It's kind of like once you cut yourself, you can keep putting Band-Aids on. It's a really big cut. You maybe need stitches. You can keep putting a Band-Aid, and it doesn't fully heal. Right? You can have that for months and it doesn't fully heal because every time you move and it just kind of cracks open again. But if you go get stitches, you do the proper thing to stitch it up. Yeah, you're going to have a scar. Great. But it's no longer a wound. And from that scar, you can actually go about and do things and not be limited because you're always trying to, cover up that wound. You're always going to the events that promise you some enlightenment and you still have this big old wound that you're trying to heal because you haven't taken the time to say, I got to stitch that thing up.
Tyler, I know we're about 41 minutes in here. I want
Yeah.
to leave the audience with like a key takeaway as those looking to improve their life and enhance their life. Is it a feeling like what should they be looking for as they go into these communities and seek these coaches? What is like one key insight or takeaway or that you would give them?
I think one of the best things that I've seen from people that have impacted my life is they're there to serve and they speak of their experiences, not their accomplishments. They speak of their personal, I would say growth and development, not their accomplishments. They speak of what others have done, not of what they've done. And I think that's a big piece. And what they've done to overcome those things and share that and encourage people and give them a pathway to do the same. And then beyond that is go to those with curiosity. You can learn from everyone. I've gone to a Grant Cardone event. I've heard Andy Frisella speak. I've heard, Ed Milet speak. And they have value for sure. But to me, it also came back to, do I want to end up like they've ended up? And from the outside, I've chosen a different path. I don't want to be that hard, that very, callous, that very protective, like I have this major armor on it. I want to smile. I want to open my arms. I want to be vulnerable to let people in because I knew that was a better way to impact and serve people and have more deep and meaningful relationships. So that comes back again, be willing to do the work, go where places where people are lifting up, not squashing down, and, be curious of your own journey. Like what pathway do you need to go through? And one of my beliefs, and it's pretty universal, is that every single person has an insecurity. In the moment that we can own it and we can admit it and we can take control of it, man, what comes after that is limitless. So.
No, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. What a great episode. I really appreciate everyone listening. Tyler, you always have some great insights every single day. I love chatting with you on these.
Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for everyone for taking time to watch, listen, and again, remember to subscribe on YouTube. If someone shared this with you, thank you to both of them. I go through the comments every day to learn and grow with people. We didn't even get into the emotions question I posted the other day. Some great conversations about that. We'll probably hit that next week. But again, thanks for being here. Till next time, choose to lead with impact.